Hello, Dr. Smukoko here. In this tutorial video, I'm going to talk about the cranial nerves that are found in the animals, and I'll be using the dog as the animal model. So what are cranial nerves and what are their functions? So the cranial nerves are just the 12 nerve pairs that are found in the animal's brain. So you find them on the left and on the right, emerging from the brain, just as the spinal nerves emerge from the spinal cord. So you also have 12 pairs of cranial nerves emerging from the brain of the animal. So these are the nerves that arise directly from the brain, and they affect movement and sensation in the eyes, face, and the neck, as well as also the trunk. So they help in the functions of the region of the head mainly. They connect the animal's brain to the various parts of the face, neck, and the trunk. So in this video, I will name the 12 cranial nerves and indicate their positions and functions in the animal's body, and specifically looking at the dog's brain. So in the subsequent videos, I will provide more detailed information on each of the 12 cranial nerves of the dog. So after going through this tutorial video, you'll be able to define a cranial nerve, and you'll also be able to state the general functions of the cranial nerves. You will also be able to list the 12 cranial nerves in order from the cranial aspect going caudally. You'll also be able to identify the cranial nerves on the brain of a dog, and you'll also be able to define what cranial nerve neuropathy is, and you should be able to state some of the consequences to the animal if there is a cranial nerve neuropathy. A few remarks before I list and say something about each of the 12 cranial nerves. The cranial nerves are numbered from 1 to 12, starting from cranial going caudally. So this is as they appear on the animal's brain. They are described functionally as being either sensory, motor, or mixed, or they are sometimes described based on their neuronal classification. So there is a way in which they are classified based on their function. This is going to be seen in the other videos on how this classification comes about. In this video, the cranial nerves will be described in terms of their numbers as well as the positions on the brain. On this slide, I'm going to list the 12 cranial nerves, starting from cranial going caudally, and I'm going to use the diagram on your right, which is the ventral view of the dog's brain. So these nerves will be shown in their order from the cranial aspect going caudally. So the first cranial nerve that we will see here is the olfactory nerve, which is cranial nerve number 1, and it is as indicated by the shape there on the diagram. And this nerve exists in form of fibers emerging from the olfactory bulb. Then this is followed by cranial nerve number 2, which is the optic nerve, and it is shown on the diagram there. The cranial nerve number 2 meets the opposite side at a place known as the optic chiasma. Then the third cranial nerve is the oculomotor nerve, and this is as indicated on the diagram there. The oculomotor nerve is followed by the cranial nerve number 4, which is the trochlear nerve, and it is as labeled there. Then we have the cranial nerve number 5, which is the trigeminal nerve, and as can be seen from the stamp there on the diagram, it is quite a large cranial nerve. So this is followed by cranial nerve number 6, which is the abducent, and it is as shown there on the diagram. Abducent is followed by cranial nerve number 7, which is the facial nerve, and it is as is labeled on the diagram. Then cranial nerve number 8 is the vestibulocochlear nerve, which is positioned on the diagram there like that. Then we have cranial nerve number 9, which is the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is labeled on the diagram there. And we also have the vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve number 10 and labeled as on the diagram there. Then we also have the accessory nerve, which is cranial nerve number 11, labeled there on the diagram. And finally, we have the hypoglossal nerve, which is labeled there, cranial nerve number 12. So as you can see, they are numbered starting from cranial going caudally. And one thing to note is that these cranial nerves have some distance in between them. Some of them have some appreciable distance between them, while others are quite close to one another. So those are the arrangements of the cranial nerves. on the dog's brain. Sometimes cranial nerves can get damaged, leading to problems in the animal's head or other parts of the body. So what is cranial neuropathy? Cranial nerve neuropathy is damage to any of the 12 cranial nerves. And cranial nerve damage may result in pain, weakness, paralysis, or numbness in any part of the head of the animal. And the cranial nerve deficits or problems may be indicative or may be a sign of peripheral involvement of individual cranial nerves, or indeed it may be indicative of a lesion within the brain, or in a cranial lesion inside the brain. So it can either be due to damage to a specific cranial nerve, or it could be a problem coming from within the brain itself, thereby affecting a specific cranial nerve. So cranial neuropathy or cranial nerve neuropathy is an important aspect of studying the cranial nerves. You have now come to the end of this tutorial video on the cranial nerves. Therefore, you should be able to define a cranial nerve, and you should be able to state the general functions of the cranial nerves. You should also be able to list the 12 cranial nerves in order from cranial to caudal. You should also be able to identify the cranial nerves on the brain of a dog, at least on the brain of a cadaver of a dog. You should also be able to define cranial nerve neuropathy, and you should also be able to state some of the consequences to the animal if cranial nerve neuropathy was to occur. Thank you for watching and listening.